Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the Conservation Commission Inland Wetlands Watercourse Agency meeting to order for Tuesday, March 7th.
Everybody can click on there, get the green light on. Especially if you're talking, if you're not talking, you're happy, but.
All right, we're calling the meeting to order. And tonight for roll call, and everyone's here except Caitlin, that we will see for Charles. Yes. All right, and we have new applications for receipt. Application CC number 23-05, Sean Rakowski, owner for wetland permit to allow site grading and depositing of 30 tons of stone in the upland review area associated with a 240 square foot shed installation in 8-year heritage lane.
I'm not sure that's. She's got a, you got to put the microphone face. Yes. Sorry. Oh, sorry. I was getting. Maybe we'll be doing it together. Hang on a second. Yeah, Madam Chair, 162305, are you 05? Yeah. 8 Heritage Lane. So it's wetlands permit application for site grading and deposit of approximately 30 tons of stone to regrade and install a 280 square foot shed at 8 Heritage Lane. So the nearest point to your wetland boundary is about 75 feet or so. So there's a good distance of it. The applicant is here with me tonight. Staff is going to recommend that you find it's non-significant activity, although we are going to want to pay close attention to erosion and sediment control measures. And then I'll let the applicant speak.
Yeah, so other than what he said, I'd like to regrade it. It's kind of a low area. Gonna put some stone in and then maybe some topsoil on top of it. I said, I do apologize. This wasn't rehearsed. I was not expecting any of this. I really don't have much to say. It's just really, it's a small parcel. Don't have a lot, just kind of trying to make better use of the land that I have.
Do you need to remove any trees?
Mostly shrubs.
I was just wondering what types of things were planning, you have any idea what and stone this? Yeah.
Lawnmower, snowboard, just like kids' toys and stuff like that. But there might be 1 or 2 trees that get down.
I mean, have questions from me.
What kind of foundation are you going to put? It's just going to be sitting on.
So like a filter fabric, and then like 3-inch trap rock, and maybe some topsoil on top of it.
That's what the shed's going to sit on.
Oh, the shed will just be probably 3/4 process. Yeah.
Just right on.
Yeah.
It's one of those prefab.
I guess
Like from bottom corner or something.
Build it right. Yeah.
What is the other material for?
Just to kind of level the whole area off and make it more usable. That corner of the property, you know. I'd really like to put some grass, plant some grass, and it's like a playscape, anything, just to utilize the small area that I have.
Are you going to be having a contractor do the actual filling, or what's the plan on that?
That would be the plan. If I can't, I just do it myself. It would take longer.
And I ask is there any plan for any runoff potentially during construction? Then there is a pretty steep grade.
I'm sorry, can you is there any what was that?
Plan for catching runoff.
Yeah, I can, if I have to, I can install like a silt fence. And then, kind of short up so that there's no.
Okay.
To get to the wetland.
Question? Okay.
Sure, I'll make the motion. I move that the Inland Wetlands Agency finds that application CC 23-05 of Sean Bierkowski, owner, for wetland permit to allow site grading and depositing of plus or minus 30 tons of stone in the open review area associated with an approximately 200 square foot shed installation at 8 Heritage Lane, Simsbury, Connecticut is a non-significant activity and scheduled for action at the regular meeting on March 21st, 2023.
Second that.
All in favor?
I.
Opposed? See you next.
Oh. Thanks for your time.
Our next application is CC 309.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just let you know, I have asked the library to send somebody from IT down. There's a little feedback here. Not quite sure what the reason is. I'm the town planner, not the IT guy. So the second application for receipt is CC 2309 at 54 Great Pond Road. This is for grading and paving and related to the construction of a 2,700 square foot single family home. The graphic you see there is, of course, the green line is the wetland boundary. The blue line is the 100 foot. So there is just a little. The house is really at 94 feet, but there is some grading and kind of rear yard clearing there, about 55 feet from the wetland boundary. Again, the staff would recommend finding of a non-significant activity and schedule it for March 21st.
Is there tree clearing about?
So as you can see, limits of disturbance, if you look at that hard line, which I think is a silt fence line, they're going to remove that tree. But outside of the red line to the silt fences, there is no, it's open field. I think there's a pine tree in the middle, but I don't think it's a particularly significant tree. But only where the red line is, the limit of the red line is for real land clearing and grading. The applicant is not here.
Nice. Thank you.
I'll move the Inland Wetlands Agency finds, thank you. Inland Wetlands Agency finds that application CC 23-09 of BBC Home Improvement Services LLC for a wetland permit to allow site grading, paving, and construction of plus or minus 2,742 square feet of the site in the upland review area associated with construction of a plus or minus 2,607 square foot house at 54 Great Pond Road, Simsbury, Connecticut, is a non-significant activity and schedule it for action at the regular meeting on March 21st, 2023.
Second.
Second.
Right, do we have, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. See what the next application. All right, so now we get to the item 3 on our agenda.
Is the microphone working? Because I'm not hearing it back.
No, we don't have the feedback, but we don't have the mic.
No, you're good. Just,
It's on.
I would move it a little bit closer, Madam Chair,
Yeah. Last time it was.
and try to project, I guess.
Okay, all right. So this is for application CC number 22-29 of Vessel RE Holdings LLC, applicant EA Properties LLC, owner, for a wetland permit to allow grading and construction of site improvements, including parking lot, landscaping, retaining wall, and guardrail in the upland review area associated with an 80-unit multifamily development at 446 Hot Meadow Street. It says there's map G13, block 142.003C.
Madam Chair, that's essentially the legal notice I was going to read, so thank you.
All right.
But I would just add, legal notice was published in the Hartford Current on consecutive Tuesdays, February 21 and February 28th, meeting the requirements. So the balance of the legal notice said Town of Simsbury Conservation Commission and Watercourse and Inland Wetland and Watercourse Agency will hold a public hearing at regular meeting on Tuesday, March 7th, 2023 at the Simsbury Public Library, beginning at 7:30 p.m.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Madam Chair, maybe you want to just let the audience know how we're going to kind of proceed, just so that they'd be aware of what the process is.
Yeah, what we're going to do is the applicant is going to make their presentation. We will be asking some questions and then we will open it up for public comment. And when you do public comment, I see there's a lot of interest here tonight. So if you keep your comments to about 5 minutes, that would be appreciated. That way we can get more comments in. And they also have to be relevant to the inland wetland condition.
There you go.
The record, my name is Peter Alter. I'm an attorney at practice law in Glastonbury at the firm of Alter and Pearson. And our firm represents the applicant vessel, the proposed developer for this site at 446 Hot Meadow Street. Present on behalf of vessel tonight is Mr. John Levy, as the representative of the applicant. In addition to information you received from me this evening, you're going to hear from our project engineer, Simsbury Moran, our certified soil scientist, James Simsbury, our certified wetland and soil scientist, as well as our wildlife conservation and management expert, Eric Davison, our landscape architect, Thomas Grossefa. Will all present information to you with respect to this application. The site that is the subject of this application is 1.97 acres plus or minus. It sits on the easterly side of Hot Meadow Street, just northerly of the intersection with Powder Forest Drive. In addition to the 1.97 acres that we propose to develop, there's a 2.39 acre piece on the easterly side of the Farmington Canal Heritage Trail, the bike path as shown on this plan. We propose no development with respect to that property. The owner of the property we propose to develop is also the owner of that property, and the two pieces will be acquired together. Farmington River is to the east of the 2.39 acre piece, several hundred feet from the site that we propose to develop. This is an existing conditions plan, just so the commission is familiar with the site. There are a number of trees that will be removed. Those are shown with X's. There are also a number of substantial mature trees that will be retained. Those are shown with the red circles, as well as foliage and growth both in the southwesterly corner and to the rear of the property along the bike trail. Those areas will also be preserved. There are, if you have not had an opportunity to view the site, there is a single family dwelling and assorted outbuildings associated with the property. Those will all be raised and removed from the property. At the present time, this property is substantially grass and developed as residential property with expansive lawns and the like. The subject of this commission's interest is our activity within the 100-foot upland review area You can see where that upland review area falls within our site. It's associated with a wetland. You can just see the edge of the wetland at the top of the frame. That wetland is associated with Second Brook, which is further to the north. In terms of distances, the nearest point of our activity to the wetland boundary is about 53 feet. And we're about 110 to 115 feet from Second Brook in terms of the activities that we propose to conduct. As you can see, the activities within the upland review area are limited to creation of some parking spaces, retaining walls to achieve appropriate grades, as well as some storm drainage facilities, all of which will be explained by Mr. Moran in his presentation as we move along. And in January 17th of this year, we attended Inland Wetlands meeting, and the agency determined that this application would be treated as one having a significant impact on a wetland or water course. As I indicated, we have no wetlands or water courses on this property, and the associated wetland and water course is to the north of our property and property owned by others. We have already submitted as part of our application materials all of the required documentation, plans, maps, and reports as required by section 7.6 and 7.6.1 of your regulations. You should have received all of those materials well in advance of this evening. With respect to your regulation, you provide guidance as to what you consider to be significant impact activities. And I want to just introduce some topics in that regard, each of which will be addressed by our experts as we proceed through our presentation. We do not propose to deposit or remove any material within the wetland or within the water course associated with that wetland. We don't believe that any activity that we propose has any impact, either short-term or long-term, on either the wetland or the water course Second Brook. There will be no change in Second Brook with respect to the manner in which it flows, the manner in which it operates in relationship to the Farmington River, with respect to, for example, flood storage capacity, the volume or velocity of the water within that brook. None of that will be impacted in any way by the activities that we propose to conduct. Nor will our activity substantially diminish the natural capacity of the wetland and water course lying to the north. Those of you who are familiar with the site know that there's a steep drop off from our site down to Second Brook. The topography is such that our site is relatively flat, begins to drop off just about at our property line and then drops to a grade down towards the wetland and then towards the Second Brook. None of which obviously we'll be touching, since all of our activity is restricted to the property that we would own. We don't believe that when you examine the sediment and erosion control plan that our project engineer has developed, I think you'll be satisfied that there is no potential for siltation or sedimentation to reach either the wetland or the water course during the development activities and until the site is stabilized. The development is will not be interrupting or substantially diminishing the natural flow of the water course or groundwater levels. Mr. Moran will walk you through his engineered plan for the infiltration of groundwater to reinvigorate the groundwater regime within the site. to handle stormwater and the manner in which it would be renovated as it's handled on our site. Something obviously that doesn't occur now. Mr. Davison and Mr. Simsbury will offer you information regarding the activities with respect to the wetland and water courses. And I think what you'll find is that our activity does not have any potential for damage or have any impact on the wetland or the water course or the habitats that are established associated with that water course and wetland with respect to our activity. As this is relatively undeveloped property, we have no reason to believe that there are any soil contaminants that would find mobility and find their way towards the wetland. And although you list as one of the items of consideration as a significant impact, the language of any condition that may adversely affect the health, welfare, and safety of any individual or community is not really a wetlands impact. And so we are going to offer any information in that regard, since that's really not, at least in our minds, a wetlands issue. To give you a little more framework for consideration of this, the total area in the upland review area that will be impacted by this development is 12,196 square feet. That's the area to the north of the red dotted line that you see within our property. It's about 1/4 of an acre. Of that, about 1,700 of an acre, 7,400 square feet has already been developed as part of the residential property. It's cleared, it's basically gone, and has been in that status for a considerable amount of time. So there's about 4,700 square feet of new activity within the upland review area from that which has occurred. What you'll hear from our experts is that we cannot determine or find or conclude that there are any short-term or long-term impacts with respect to the wetland associated with Second Brook, and that we believe that the proposed activity represents a very minimal intrusion into the upper reach of an upland review area, and in that regard, we cannot conclude that any of the standards that you set out as matters of significant impact will actually occur. With that, I'm going to ask Mr. Moran to come up and walk you through his plans with respect to the project. He is our civil engineer and has developed both the stormwater management plan and the erosion and sedimentation control.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioner. My name is Seamus Moran. I work for H&H Engineering Associates under professional engineer in Connecticut. And I will walk you through the site plan that we have before you. Attorney Oliver just gave us a very nice overview of what we're looking at. So I'll touch on some of the stormwater and soil erosion control elements to our design. Just one point of clarification, that wetland limit is actually obtained from town mapping. It's not our property, so we weren't on the property flagging the wetland, so that was obtained from town mapping. Just a quick point of clarification. As Mr. Alter pointed out, I'll work on the grading and drainage plan here that you see before you. Obviously, just to orient you, the building is in the lower right corner, 80 units. Obviously, you know what the parking lot looks like. There's 95 parking spaces. And the parking lot is all grading from the high point is off the property to the south. And it's grading obviously towards the wetland to the north. The high point on our property is about elevation 101, which is along that side of the property line in the southwest corner. And then 84 is where our stormwater discharge points are. So what's happening is the site is also grading, believe it or not, from south to north. So the high point along the parking lot is in that southwest corner, and the low point is in the northeast corner. All of the stormwater generated from the proposed parking lot will be collected in a catchment system. So you can see there's a series of catch basins and piping network on the plan. And that is directed to a subsurface stormwater management system. It's called an ADS StormTech MC 3500 system. What happens is that the water gets into the catch basins, which are fit with deep sumps or 4-foot sumps to allow pre-treatment of sediment. And then it goes into what's called an isolator row. And these isolator rows are essentially these chambers that are wrapped in fabric that all of the water from the stormwater system passes through these isolator rows. It captures any of the sediment. It's actually an 83% removal of PSS, 50% of oils, 45, I think, of phosphorus, others. So there are a lot of removal properties of these isolator rows, and that's just for the water quality event, which is the 1-inch storm event. What we're looking at is these isolator rows. They're designed for a flow to go through them, and it's the flow that's going through them is equivalent to the 100-year storm event. So the stormwater generated from the proposed parking lot, all of that will be treated through these isolator rows. The additional rows, as you can see, there's the shaded rows are the isolator rows. The opposite rows, the ones that aren't shaded, are for detention purposes and allow for infiltration. So we have the isolator rows for the treatment. There is some infiltration property to the subsurface system, and then and also detention, and then an outlet control structure, which will control the level of water in that outlet. I'm sorry, in the subsurface system. So it allows a certain amount of tension in those systems. So the subsurface system for the parking lot is item A, stormwater management area A. The other one, another major one is stormwater management area B, which is for the building. We're separating the two. It's generally best management practice to keep parking lot.
I'm sorry, could you tell us where they
I'm
are?
sorry.
Are you the pointer?
There is a pointer right in the middle of the clicker.
Yes, please, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So stormwater management area A is this subsurface system here. That's the one I was just explaining. You can see that there's some catch basins scattered throughout here. So this parking lot, this is the high point, this is the low point. It all drains in that direction, captured by the catch basins on site, and it goes to the subsurface system here. As I mentioned, this is an isolator row. This here is an isolator row, and this is an isolator row. So all of those isolator rows are designed to treat water quality. The additional rows that are not isolator rows are for detention, so we can meter the peak rates. This, what we're looking at here, this is an outlet control structure, and that meters the flow. So there's a weir in there, there's a local orifice, and all that means is it allows water to build up at certain elevations in the basin. I'm sorry, in the subsurface structure. Management area B, which is right now shown here, this is actually being relocated after a conversation we had with the town engineer. This is being relocated to the west side of the building. So this stormwater management basin here will no longer be here. So we're maintaining all this vegetation in here. The grade essentially matches in on the side. So everything on the east side of the building, we're trying to maintain and match grade and maintain vegetation on the side. So this basin will no longer be here. The basin will be on the west side. This basin will essentially take the stormwater runoff from the proposed building and treat that. This is a bioretention basin. That's an at-grade basin with a dry well on the bottom of it here. Bioretention basin uses vegetation to uptake nutrients. And again, that will have an outlet control structure, which is essentially just a catch basin with that'll allow water to get into the catch basin so we can control the amount of water in the basin so that never overtops. The last management areas, I guess, are here. This is an infiltration trench, and this is another surface, I guess, basin you'd call it, and it's just simply for stormwater runoff that's coming from off the property onto our property, so we can collect that runoff before it gets into the parking lot and just allow that to infiltrate. So that's what this infiltration trench is here. This line. And this surface, small surface basin, that's not for any runoff we're generating, for off-site runoff. In terms of maintenance of these systems, it's pretty not self-explanatory, it's pretty straightforward, I guess I should say. So in these, in the chambers, it's an inspection port in the isolator rows. So all of the stormwater that goes through the isolator row, the isolator row is the only treatment source. So any sediment buildup is going to be in any of those isolator rows. Those isolator rows have inspection ports that you open the inspection port and you stick a stadia rod in to see how much depth there is of sediment. Anytime there's an accumulation of 3 inches of sediment, they put in a essentially vacuum into this. There's an inlet catch basin at each of them, each of these isolator rows, and they can access the isolator rows through those catch basins. So you pop the top of the manholes, insert a vacuum in there, and it's vacuumed out all of the sediment. So the maintenance plan calls for inspection for the first year, twice for the first year, and then once every year after that. Storm Tech says that based on typical usage, they usually need planes at most every 7 to 10 years. So we don't actually expect them to be cleaned that often, but we do have a maintenance plan that they're to be inspected annually. In a very similar fashion, any catch basins on site, the plan is to inspect them twice the first year, and then every year after that. Anytime there's sediment buildup of 12 inches in the bottom of the catch basin, that's to be vacuumed out. And same with any of the drywall. So there's a drywall here, and there's a drywall here. Same thing, if there's any sediment buildup in those drywalls, it will be vacuumed out. An inspection of those 2 drywalls occurs once a year as well. The bioretention basin, it's again here. That is a surface basin, and the only thing you have to do for that is if there's any ponded water, if you witness any ponded water after, I think it's 48 hours after a storm event, or any consistent ponding of water 48 hours after an event, you have to go in and rototill the top 6 inches of soil, and then reset that soil. Essentially, in case it gets compacted after rain events, it might actually hold the water a little bit longer. So you essentially rototill it and loosen it up a little bit. So I think that's it for the grading and drainage of stormwater plan. The utility plan is pretty self-explanatory. You can see here is a water line. There's water and sewer in the street. We have a sewer line that comes out of our building in this location here to a manhole out to, this is an existing lateral, like a 6-inch lateral. We're planning to replace that lateral with an 8-inch lateral. And that will run as an 8-inch all the way into the building. The water line, on the other hand, will be on the north side of the building, all the way to here, and to the existing lateral that is shown on this plan. Electric, there's a transformer shown in the northwest corner here, and that will run primary electric telephone cable will run the north side of the development and to the northeast corner of the building. I've probably done utilities for the soil erosion sediment control plan. What you see here in the back right corner, this is a temporary sediment trap. That is size. One of the detail sheets we talk about how that is sized based on the contributing area. Half of that volume in the bottom is for sediment, and then the top half is for water storage. So what you have here is essentially a 3-foot deep hole in the ground, and there's at the top of this slope here, there's a temporary diversion swale. So as we disturb the soil here, there's a diversion swale that collects any of that potentially sediment-laden runoff into the temporary sediment trap. And there are requirements of when that has to be cleaned out on the plan as well. Any of the steep slopes that you see in here, any slopes, I guess 3 to 1 or steeper along the basins, slopes, those are to be fit with erosion control matting to prevent any erosion on the steeper slopes. And then what you can't see at this scale is there's a silt fence, hay bale back silt fence along the northern edge of the property that extends along all of the down gradient limits of disturbance. What you see here is the temporary sediment pile, temporary topsoil stockpile area outside the 100-foot review area, concrete washout area. And then each of the catch basins will have inserts to prevent any sediment from getting into the catch basins. I think that might be it for the The soil erosion control plan for the outlet. Sure. So if I go back to the grading plan, Mr. Officer just asked me to clarify the outlet location of our discharge pipe. So again, what we have here is a subsurface system. We'll have an outlet control structure for this. These will all be directed to an outlet head wall. So there's one pipe. This pipe is being removed. There's one pipe that outlets through the outlet head wall. And at this location, the way we have to manage stormwater is to show that the peak rates for the proposed condition are less than or equal to the pre-existing condition. So we have to evaluate the peak rate getting to our northern property line, which is essentially the wetland. So we're evaluating the southern edge of the wetland off the property. And we're making sure that the peak rate of runoff from the pre-development condition to our post-development condition is less than or equal to the pre-existing condition. So for example, if it's the pre-existing condition says it's 15 CFS at the 100-year storm event, exiting our property, not just from this outlet location, anywhere along our property, across this property line onto the wetland has to be, will be less than 15 CFS. Next up will be our wetland scientist, Mr. Shipley.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the commission, members of the public. My name is James Simsbury. I'm a certified soil scientist and also a Connecticut wetland scientist. And I feel compelled to tell you that I'm also the environmental planner for the city of Middletown and staff the wetland commission there. I'm also the wetland agent part-time for the town of Portland, Connecticut, and I'm also on my wetland commission advisor where I live. I visited the site. Did everybody get a copy of my report, by the way? Okay,
Yes.
Maybe what I'll do, it kind of flows pretty good, so I don't miss anything. Maybe I'll just kind of like read it into the record so the public can, get everything, understand my rationale. I visited the site on October 23rd, 2022. And I conducted a field site visitation to the entire property referenced above this address. And to evaluate the existing wetlands and water courses that might be on the site. And I did not find any wetlands and water courses on the site. I did not trespass the property to the north. We weren't allowed on that property to evaluate anything. So my limits were to the acreage that exists on the slot. There are wetlands located directly north of the site, down a steep embankment associated with the second brook. And the limits of the offsite wetlands are delineated on the Simsbury wetland map entitled G13. These offsite wetlands are classified as a poorly drained and very poorly drained Ridgeberry, Lester, and Whitman soil. These soils are grouped together as a complex because they have similar physical characteristics, use, and management. The wetlands along the brook support forested swamp vegetation, and the 100-foot upland review area extends onto the site, and Eric will tell you more about that vegetation. So I looked at the functions and values of the wetlands. The inland wetland soils and water courses have different wetland functions and values, primarily depending upon their size, the location on the landscape, and what they are being used for. The 10 general wetland functions that exist that are rated is groundwater recharge or discharge, flood flow alteration, fish and shellfish habitat, sediment toxicant pathology retention, nutrient removal and retention, product export, which means that the wetlands has the ability to process food and breakdown of organic matter in aquatic systems, sediment and shoreline stabilization, wildlife habitat function, if there's any endangered species habitat, and any human value or historical significance. Those are all the functions that are measured. The wetland system along the second brook corridor is of high value and performs many functions, and they include groundwater recharge and discharge, flood storage and discharge, fin fish habitat. I looked at the edge of the brook where it enters the Farmington Canal, and even in October, I could see little tiny minnows. So I would imagine those things do migrate up further up because it's pretty flat and level. Also, sediment retention, product export and sediment retention, and there's definitely wildlife habitat corridor through there. The proposed construction activities basically there are no proposed construction activities in and adjacent to the wetland, and there's no filling or grading on and off the site. The upland review area does exist in this site. The proposed construction activities within the upland review area is basically clearing of vegetation, grading, stormwater improvements, and installation of a parking lot, guardrail, retaining wall, and some lighting and landscaping. The key to any successful project is basically to eliminate the probability of any potential impacts, and that is done by proper erosion and sedimentation control, installation, and maintenance. A comprehensive erosion sedimentation plan was developed on the sheets that you saw earlier, sheet SE1 and sheet SEN1, and it's important that they be installed pursuant to the plan. Regular inspections should be done after every significant storm event. We recommend, like, after a 1 inch of, if there's a 1 inch of rain, you have it inspected, but if there's a 1 inch of rain expected, you have to inspect it before the rain. You know, you don't want to go up there after and see what occurred, you want to do it before. And the commission can stipulate that that occurs. It's very important, especially on this site, because everything kind of drains kind of in that direction. The long-term impact of the proposed activities. The applicant should implement best management practices for de-icing the parking lot. There's always a concern, based on my experience with wetland commission members and parking like this. What are they going to do for icing? How are they going to control, ice and snow? There's enough area where the snow can be pushed off in a snow shelf. But the key is with maintaining and trying to control ice and snow is pre-treatment. I've been to a lot of seminars and read a lot of materials. If you pre-treat a parking area with calcium chloride and a light sand prior to the storm, all right, if stuff is on the material, if it's on the pavement before the storm, and it snows and rains and ices, it's much more effective as if you wait when the stuff already hits the pavement, and then you come in later with a truck and try to control it as the snow's coming down. Pre-treatment is really a really good benefit. So that's what I'm recommending, that it be pre-treated. Proposed stormwater management plan will treat all the water before it is discharged to the wetland. Proposed planting plan prepared by Tom. You'll see you'll also have native trees and shrubs, nothing invasive. And I didn't see any invasive species on the site when I was there, but I'm sure Eric will talk about that a lot more in detail. So I believe that based on the design, this is the best feasible improvement alternative, and that if it's done correctly, using best management practices and still planned to maintain, that there will be no adverse effect to the wetlands and water courses off the site resulting from this proposed construction activities. So that's what I have. Now you go from Eric.
Do I need a microphone?
Yeah.
Yes, my name is Eric Davison. I'm a wildlife biologist with 23 years of experience practicing in Connecticut. And also like Jim and like you folks, I sit on my wetland commission in my hometown chapter. Our role in this project was fairly narrow and specific. So I just want to be clear about what we did and did not do. We were retained to basically ensure or navigate compliance with what's called the Natural Diversity Database program, which is a DB program that looks at impacts to state listed plants and animals and critical habitats, which is required for any state permits that
We can't hear back, we're back here. And we need, like, I apologize, but.
Is that better?
Or maybe this way.
Yeah.
Sorry to turn this off.
No, just
Put the mic.
put it closer. Like you're saying.
Is that any better?
So again, our role was to work on compliance with the state DEP's National Diversity Database Program, which is required for state permits. What drives that is a National Diversity Database preliminary review, which the applicant submitted and was returned and is included in my report. That review basically provides a list of species that could potentially inhabit the site. And that letter is included as an appendix in my report. So that list came back with a fish species, 3 freshwater mussel species, a leopard frog, eastern box turtle, and then 3 stateless plants. We were engaged to evaluate the site in October. So we conducted site visits, myself, a fisheries biologist on our staff, and also a botanist to review the site, because those are basically the 3 suites of species that came back. We had myself as the amphibian reptile expert, botanist, and a fisheries biologist to look at the freshwater mussel and fish habitat. As you could probably glean from that list that's in my report that I just ran through, these are species that are largely associated with the riverine and riparian habitat that border the site. This is pretty typical when you have a small site. The analysts that do the review and issue the letters, they don't have the opportunity to walk the site or understand what's on the site, so they sort of draw a very coarse bubble around the property. Any known records of listed species that are in that area come back, and sometimes those species come back. The list comes back with species that would not necessarily be relevant to the site, but just are merely adjacent to the site. And that's basically a large portion of my report, is discussing some of these species that are obviously not present. Let me start with the slimy sculpin. That's an upper perennial small fish species that is known in Second Brook. I observed that species in Second Brook myself during work I did back in the early 2000s in Powder Forest. So we know that exists in Second Brook. The leopard frog, the 3 mussel species are all species that are known to occur basically in the Farmington River and its floodplain. The 3 plant species, Davis sedge, Wiegand's, wild rye, and Virginia waterleaf, are also riparian species that are known to occur in the Farmington River floodplain. So just backing up to the start of my list here, so I can try to summarize these species. The sculpin obviously doesn't occur on the site. It occurs in Second Brook. You heard testimony and discussion about the distance of the site to Second Brook. The leopard frog is something that occurs relatively distant to the site in the Farmington River floodplain, but within 500 feet, give or take. Eastern box turtle is a fairly ubiquitous species. Again, another species that we know occurs in this area, and I also observed box turtle in Powder Forest some 20 years ago. So we know they occur in the area. They're also present in the Farmington River floodplain. They can occur in residential habitats and residential sites like the subject site, but not in any significant numbers. But anybody that has a backyard in Simsbury that backs up to a wooded area or wetland area has probably seen a box turtle in the past 10 or 20 years, so they're pretty common. We were able to do, it was October when we did our site visit, so we weren't able to rule out every species, and that's summarized in my report as to the potential for some of these species. With respect to the plants, David said we were able to rule out, because we were able to key out all of those sedges, even though it was late in the season because it was before we had a killing frost, and those plants are identifiable. The wild rye and the water leaf, we were not able to key out entirely, but we didn't find any plants that we call congeners, basically plants that fall within that same genus and have those same characteristics. So it's very unlikely that those 3 plants occurred, but we had a very dry summer, drought conditions where a lot of plants senesced early, so it's not something we can say absolutely doesn't occur. But again, both of those plant species are really forest and riparian species, not species that occur in residential properties. So if we were to do a full-blown survey of the site on a during the appropriate season, which would be summer, we would focus on the edges, which would be the north side and the east side, where you basically have that forest just barely entering into the site property. So because we did the work in October, that's why we entitled the report basically a habitat evaluation. The intent was this gets submitted to NEDB for their review. If they agree that they don't see any issue or impact with respect to their oversight, which is basically incidental take of save the species, they would write us a final determination of concurrence that we could then use for permit applications to the state. If not, they would ask for more information, which would be, hey, we want you to go out and do a full-blown survey, which would be, again, we couldn't do it last summer because we didn't get initiated to do the work until October. We would do it this summer. So that's really the intent of this report, that this gets filed during the winter, and we have next summer to respond if in fact they ask for a full-blown survey. I would tell you it's not typical when you have a 2-acre site that's largely developed with residential use for them to ask for a full-blown survey of the site, given the site conditions that we documented in our report. And the fact that most of these species are really riparian species, not associated with the property itself. Our recommendations are pretty brief in the report. We're not engaged to do a deep dive into the site plans because, as I've summarized, most of the biology here is associated with wetlands, and Jim was doing that sort of analysis of what the project impacts would be on wetlands. But we made general recommendations, and that being, we don't really see direct impacts here on the site itself for these listed species, but you really do want to consider secondary impacts. Again, we know that Second Brook supports sculpin, and we know the Farmington River floodplain, which is again within a few hundred feet on the other side of the trail. Many of these other species occur. Again, summarizing in our conclusions, secondary impacts you really want to focus on are lighting and on stormwater. You really want to make sure that you have primary treatment and no impact on peak flows or volumes that's going to affect fisheries habitat. But the other note we had made that was to design the landscaping plan in a way that it's native landscaping, doesn't have the potential to exacerbate any infestation of invasive species. So that's really the focus of the secondary impacts. The lighting, just to clarify the lighting. For amphibian species, you don't want light spillage into wetlands. Leopard frog, being a species that is going to breed in that open floodplain wetland area. There's a lot of activity by amphibians at night, breeding, mating activity. So light spillage can impact that. So you really want to have directional lighting that doesn't leave the site, which is pretty common now. Anytime you're doing construction, you're a conservation area. But again, the report with the audience for the report really was deep, not necessarily deep folks. So I hope I didn't increase you too fast. I can answer any questions you might have, but it was the intent of this was not a site-wide wildlife survey for all things that could be occurring on the site. That's what everybody was hoping for or expecting.
I can't show this to the whole audience. I'll leave this here so we can refer to it. My name is Tom Gruseppa. I'm a landscape architect, live in Manchester, and we've been working with Vessel for going on a year here now with various projects. The preemptive displays you've seen and thoroughness are simplified in this planting plan that you're looking at. We've
We've used only native varieties. I don't have a plant list on this exact plan because it was crafted just a few days ago that really refined a lot of the activities on it. But we've used great care. Seamus has done a terrific job in not grading several areas. This entire property really was heavily wooded with mostly trees that survived the construction process when the house was built. And some were installed, but a lot of trees near the street were saved in the major island right as you come into the property. And on the south edge where the drainage so this is the drainage area I'm talking about. I've used some river birch in here to both block the view and they'll thrive in this wet area. The surviving plant material after grading was running almost a straight line here. We noticed that these trees are located in here. They have the red circles around them in the first plan. And they're significant. There are 4 trees in this location that are, one of them is absolutely magnificent, 48-inch oak, so it's in there. And there's a good size oak here. Along this edge and along a little bit along the southern edge, but significantly, this was a detention area, infiltration area, and now it's the existing vegetation that's there, and there's a high ridge. If you walk this trail, the ridge that's in this area is taller than 6 feet. I couldn't see into it, and of course, there's tremendous plant material on the east side of the path. But we're saving ribbons, if you will, along the edge that will give us a transitional feeling from the developed property to the existing woodland. And this just was changed a few days ago, and it really makes a big difference. What we're using for plant material has kind of 2 uses in this setup. This line of trees and this line of trees, if you look over on the colored plan in front of me, you'll see red lines. So the units themselves in the apartments have a single window on the outside edge, so along this side of the building and along this side of the building. And the privacy is key for the residents to feel comfortable. So we're using a red obelisk beach, remains very narrow, 5 feet in width, and will get to a significant height in its older age. But that really provides a screen for the residents, and they're natives as well. This happens to be a European beach, but it's the only one that really has this vestigial or columnar form. The areas of view into the site from the north, we have elevation working for us here, and we're using tall grasses in much of this area. And the other area that's not grasses is going to be a meadow mix of native plant material seeded in place with erosion mats. We use 3 oaks along the top ridge here just to reforest some of this area and give it some definition. The islands here are the ones that have lighting in them, like this is a light right here. There's another one over here. We had to keep the shade trees out of that area, but the other islands, this is another light here, for instance, one over here. All those islands are planted and non-lawn. The lawn area isn't your typical lawn. There is a very low mow, almost a no mow situation that's highly seeded with fescue, which lays down. And so it isn't something we fertilize, it isn't something we water. This does create a recreation area here that does have some grade change. We're going to work out that detail and this drainage pattern that picks up water as it's flowing across the drops into this channel and gets funneled out to the south here. There is a sidewalk that this right here comes off of this pad and walks right along the outside edge of the hotel of the rooms themselves, though it's on the outside of this beach road. So the highlights really existing trees saved, grade maintained to save many more trees than we're putting in. And the reaction of saving soil so that we have all the topsoil that's available on the site reused before we haul any of it off the site. We're recommending 6 inches of topsoil replaced so that we have some good organic means and nutrient means built into the soil. We're not irrigating, and we think we have species that are going to be able to survive for all intents and purposes for their particular use. So I'll answer any questions as well, or pass them.
Thank you again. For the record, Seamus Moran. I was tasked with talking about, I think, 4 things, and I forgot 2 of them. So one thing I was supposed to touch on was snow storage. This plan is good for that. What we'll end up doing for snow storage, if you see, we have to pointer again. There's this area here, the snow shelf here. If any trucks entering, what likely will happen is they'll try and come in here, and we're going to have a snow storage area in here. The reason being, if they stockpile the snow here, then we're outside the 100-foot review area. Number 2, there's a basin here to collect any of that, any of the snow as it melts, to allow it to infiltrate the other area. So we have 95 parking spaces on site, where 83 are required. So what we'll end up doing is these 6 spaces here will be coned off. So that way any vehicles can come in here and push the snow into this area here. That's again outside the 100-foot review area, and in an area where we can allow it to melt and infiltrate and get out that way, rather than what we're not going to do is allow it to stockpile along the edges here to freely drain into the wetland. So we'll keep it in these areas outside the 100-foot review area to allow it to infiltrate and won't be a direct snow melt discharge. This last area of this parking lot, there's they'll just have to push it towards the end here. Again, this is the 100-foot review line that comes right through here. So there will be a little bit of snow that likely have to pile up at the end here, just because that's how the trucks operate. In terms of LID improvements, obviously we don't have a lot of the parking lot. What we do have is the bioretention. Separating the building runoff from the parking lot runoff is an LID improvement. The bioretention basin itself is an LID improvement. And also maintaining some of the largest trees. We reconfigured some of this front. Low impact development, I apologize, is to maintain some of these larger trees. The reason being they absorb water, so that's an LID feature to maintain some of the existing vegetation to allow some uptake. Lastly, a stone infiltration trench that we have here. That is also an LID feature. Reason being it captures and infiltrates runoff from off site before it gets onto our site. So again, that's our third LID. And last one, thank you. Oh, we're going back one. Oh. George, can you walk away?
LID. What is LID?
LID stands for low impact development.
There you go.
Thank you. So this is the lighting plan you see before you. There are sporadic light fixtures. You can see one here. What's more obvious are the spread of them. So you can see kind of the spread of each of these fixtures. There's a fixture here, and fixture here. What you can see is the dark text, which you can see, is where they're, well, I guess not all of it. So some of these are 0.0. What that shows is there's no light pollution beyond our property limits. These fixtures are solar fixtures.
Oh, it's this building.
These fixtures are solar fixtures, which you can see in the bottom corner, and these are provided from the from the lighting affiliate. This is how the light from the fixture spreads from the fixture itself, based on the height of the light fixture. It was 16 feet, and we have a light fixture here. So there's 4 in this general area to wash the parking lot. And then we have 3 along the northern edge, pointing in the direction of the parking lot.
Would you want to talk about like the light direction and how it's like hooded?
Sure. Yeah. So I believe all in the regulations, full cutoff fixtures are required. So the light is shining directly down. It's not out. It's not a rounded fixture. It's not projecting light in each direction. It's pointed straight down. That's the point of the full cutoff fixture. So what you see for the spread is the light is shining straight down, but as the cone of that light is coming down, it reaches these extents here. So it doesn't go beyond those because it's a full cutoff dark sky compliant fixture.
What is it, 16 feet? What Kelvin?
I'm not sure what Kelvin. I haven't checked the lighting actually on that. On that side. Yeah. All right.
I just want to make a couple of final comments, and then all of our representatives are happy to answer questions that the agency may have. And obviously, once the public has had an opportunity to ask questions or make comments, we would ask for the opportunity to respond. Madam Chairman, I assume that, or maybe I shouldn't assume it, but I would expect that if there are a number of questions asked, you would wait until all the questions are asked and then you would answer them all at once rather than hop up and down. Is that acceptable?
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
I want to reiterate, first of all, both Mr. Simsbury's findings in his written report that was submitted, where in his professional opinion, he finds that the proposal represents the best feasible and proven alternative in regards to direct and indirect short-term and long-term impacts to the wetland and water course. He finds that there'll be no significant adverse impact to the wetland and water course, whether on-site or off-site, resulting from the proposed development. Mr. Davison also provided some findings in his report and reached the same effective conclusion, emphasizing the importance of proper management during the time of development, as well as continuing best management practices, proper management of stormwater, and a native landscaping plan prevents the likelihood of the establishment or dispersal of invasive species. For example, you heard from our landscape architect that he has utilized native species exclusively on our site in order to address the implications that invasive species seem to impose upon almost every piece of property. Finally, your regulation calls out a number of criteria for a decision with respect to this application. It's under section 10.2 of your regulation. And I think we have addressed, provided you with information from experts that indicate that there will be no negative environmental impact by virtue of our activity in the upland review area, either on wetland or water courses which are associated with this property. As I indicated, our nearest activity is about 53 feet from the edge of the wetland and over 100 feet from the second brook. The systematic criteria that are developed in 10.2A, I believe, have all been addressed. If any commission member feels that you need more information in that regard, we're happy to provide it. But I think that it's a fair conclusion that this proposed development does not indicate any negative impacts on either the wetland or the water portion, based on our experts' opinions. The issue of both short and long-term impacts of the proposed regulated activity have been addressed. I think you heard from Mr. Moran, our project engineer, that he has taken every possible measure in terms of stormwater management to create a much better discharge of groundwater and stormwater than currently exists coming off of the site due to the treatment train that is part of his design for both treatment and retention control of the runoff, so that it duplicates that which occurs currently. There is no loss of either wetland or water course resource as a result of this development. And finally, and this is the hard part of this application for me, because you determined that this may have a significant impact, it becomes our responsibility to present you with a prudent, feasible alternative to our development. And frankly, our position is that the plan that you have before you is the best prudent and feasible development plan. There really is no better opportunity than we present to you to both renovate stormwater and control it, to create a site that is properly developed and graded, to protect the wetlands to the north through a very comprehensive sedimentation erosion control plan, all of which are laid out in the plans that are prepared and the notes to those plans. Sometimes we don't pay enough attention to the notes that engineers put on the plans. We sort of skip past those pages because it's very small print and very detailed in its language. But what Seamus has done is develop a whole plan of best management practices, not only during the development process, but afterwards, like as he described, the maintenance of the stormwater detention system that he's developed. All of that has been part of the ongoing review with the town staff. We have been dealing with an issue of infiltration between our engineer and the town's engineer. We think that that matter is well on its way to being resolved, so that infiltration will be achieved as expected. But in all other respects, we think that every issue that the town engineer had in his memos has been addressed. And we feel confident that the plan that we have presented to you is the most prudent and feasible alternative. We're happy to discuss that with you. One of the pronouncements in your regulation is that if you don't think that's true, you would make some suggestions as to what might be, in your minds, more prudent and feasible, and we're happy to address those. With that, we're happy to answer any questions. I don't know whether the commission typically simply starts with the public now or asks its own questions.
I think we're going to start with the commissioners.
Very good.
So, we're opening it up to questions from the commissioners, and then,
should we ask all our questions first and then you answer, or shall we do it individually with the various experts? that are here?
Typically, for commission questions, I would have the expert come up and answer it
Thank you.
immediately.
All right, I know I have several, but does anyone have one that they want to start with?
I'm just questioning, or I have a question about the in a big storm event, like a hurricane or something, where it's dropping a lot of water. Where does the overflow go? Do the, what's the plan for, a big type hurricane like we had, 10 years ago?
Sure. So as part of the stormwater analysis, you have to evaluate the water quality event, which is a 1-inch storm, the 2-year, the 5-year, the 10-year, the 25, the 50, and the 100-year storm event. So the 100-year storm event is an event that you suggest is probably once in your lifetime. So a hurricane event, that's a once in a lifetime event. And it has to be designed for that reason. So the stormwater management system allows a certain amount of water to pool, and then the outlet control structure meters that water. So there's a weir in the outlet control structure that allows certain water to get out. And the amount we allow out is just the product of how much is currently getting there now. So we try and match the pre-existing with the post-development. So again, if it's 15 CFS now, if it's a 100-year storm event, our development has to be 15 or less for the proposed conditions.
Yeah, what if there's a big storm though, and the two surface things and the subsurface are getting filled up?
Yeah.
If it like fills up, what happens then?
So there's the basin is designed so the 100-year water surface elevation in the basin is a foot below the top of the basin. So there's a foot of freeboard, and that's part of the manual that we have designed to. The system, the subsurface system, there's a storage above the top of the system. So the chambers, you almost want to design to the top of the chambers, and then there's 9 inches of stone above the chambers as well. And that storm event, it's above the weir elevation, so that water will continue to discharge above that weir elevation. But it's all designed to be contained within each of the practices. So it will not it's designed so it will never overtop, at least for the 100-year. A 500-year storm, I've never evaluated a 500-year event. However, it's all designed based on 100-year, and there's certain clearances to the top of that they have to maintain.
So with a 100-year design criteria, you're not going to have water gushing over the top into the second row.
The top of your basin will be a foot above that water elevation in your basin. And in your subsurface system, you'll have 9 inches of stone above that as well.
What is the 100-year storm? Is there a rainfall per 24-hour period?
There is a 2-year, 24-hour event. I don't have it with me. It's probably in the magnitude of 9 inches or so. And a 2-year, the 24-hour storm event. Sorry. So over that span. And I don't have it with me, but it's probably in that magnitude.
That's for the 100 years, 9 inches, and
Probably somewhere in that magnitude.
okay.
Thinking of the discharge where it gets daylighted, the precondition was it's discharging throughout the whole site, but after construction, we just discharging in 2 spots.
So you'll have, what we're evaluating is the edge of the wetland. That's our design point. We're trying to find out what the edge of the wetland is. So our design point to discharge, will have a level spreader in there. So it'll discharge to the pipe and then into the stone, which the size or whatever the flow is, and it'll sheet flow overland after the stone. So it'll spread out from the stone in that general location.
But you have a design in plans for the level spreader.
Yeah, so the head wall at the outlet, that stone is 10 feet wide.
Is that at the top of the slope or is it at the bottom?
What should say this? Oh. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So that's the outlet location. This is the head wall here. And this is about 10 feet wide.
It's at the base.
Of our site, the wetland is down another 20 feet from our site.
So it is more concentrated than it would be pre-construction.
Sure, but if the property is 400 feet long, it's going to be, one discharge location will be a 10-foot section. It'll then sheet flow over.
Is that the only discharge from the property?
Yes, that's the only discharge. The other discharge locations, there's just an emergency outfall here. This basin here, this is just offsite runoff. This doesn't have a pipe discharging this. I think this basin right here is 1.7 feet at the 100-year storm event to the top of the basin. That will never over top. There's an outlet control structure that will be in here, that will discharge to here. So all of our building and our parking lot runoff will discharge in this location.
And so you mentioned snow removal at the northeast corner of the property. There would be some snow storage there likely.
Northeast?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you had mentioned that section there, and that is where one of the catch basins is.
Yep.
So what would happen if snow was pulled up and ice was pulled up over that, would that affect the discharge down in there?
If it froze over the catch basin,
If it's being piled up there over the winter.
Yep, if it froze over the top of the catch basin, and didn't allow water to pass through, then yes, of course, that would.
And the debris as well.
Yeah, but I wouldn't, so there's several catch basins. This catch basin here essentially captures from this point down. So it's this lower section of the parking lot where the catch basins are obviously set to capture certain portions of the parking.
And what is there a maintenance plan for ensuring that the catch basins are kept leak clear and they're not getting clogged and the flow is occurring elsewhere?
Sure, yeah, so there is in the maintenance plan, the first year, it's inspected twice in the first year, and then every year after that, it's to be inspected once per year. And if there's sediment buildup in the bottom of that, or if there's debris or anything like that, that's to be removed.
So only once a year though, after that first year?
So there will be a tenant who lives in the building, and that person will be responsible. So if there is buildup over the catch basin, that person would see that, and it's not, obviously the obligation is once per year to check for the sediment, test for the sediment, see how deep it is to vacuum it out. But if there's obviously debris clogging the catch basin, the tenant would see that and clear that. He's essentially the property manager, a live-in property manager.
I just like to take a look at the lighting plan again. I don't know who is the lighting person. So, okay, so I see the cones of light from the various parking lot structures, the parking lot. But what about the building itself, as far as lighting on that? Is that lit, or I mean, how is that going to affect the overall, keeping it on the property?
Yeah. Josh, yeah, that's all. So the lighting in the building doesn't have any external lighting, like floodlights or anything else like that, that are directed onto the property. And everything's internal grade lighting that doesn't produce any extra light beyond it.
So
Is it a glass wall? Is it a glass wall?
It's not glass, but it's a similar idea, just not as see-through as well.
So, okay, so what you're saying then is there are lights on, external lights on the building? Or external lights. So the only lighting would be what is shown here in the parking lot?
Correct.
And as far as the lighting, the Kelvin rating is very important for the amphibians. You want more of the yellow lights rather than the blue lights, those being.
Yes, certainly, as you can see, none of the lights go off, none of the light actually goes off of the property.
No, I mean, it still affects the insects and the wildlife is still going to come to the lights if the lights are on. The blue lights tend to affect attract the insects more than that attracts predators. So, I would recommend that you choose a warm light, warm Kelvin rather than the blue Kelvin.
On the topic of lighting, have we considered the likely impact of the cars in the parking lot, the direction and distance that the light pollution from the likely cars using the lot would be?
So, certainly.
button in the middle.
Thank you. So you can see, here, there's a retaining wall right here. And there's a retaining wall right here. And then there's, land back. And then you can see also the landscaping that's beyond the retaining wall, all these areas, as well as the additional trees that are there, in all these paths. And so all of those things are done for two reasons. One, obviously, to integrate the property, make sure it's greater growth. The other thing is that it blocks out the lights associated with all of the cars. As you know, as cars are, once they pull in, the lights obviously go off. But the purpose of this will screen out the cars, right, for during this time.
So along that edge, there's gonna be native grasses, all native grasses?
Yeah, there's native grasses, there's a mix of.
So I have a native mix, a meadow mix along the whole north part of the property. And knowing that, because this final plan just was created a few days ago, we'll probably use a taller grass that's seeded in there as well. A sedum or something that gets above buffer height.
So those grasses will be mowed during the spring, and they'll get smashed down during the summer, I mean, the winter with the snow.
Yes.
So it'll only provide seasonal blockage.
Well, we don't have bugs and. But as far as the light is concerned, are you talking about the light?
Talking about the car lighting.
Yeah.
Coverage off.
They pull the stalls and hopefully they turn off the lights going on. Yeah, I guess that.
Yeah, if there were to snow that was above the plants, then the snow would actually be.
No, I recognize that, but we get snow melt and the grasses can be trampled with the snow, they can be broken down during the winter. But I'm just thinking of some planting that would be more light blocking.
I mean, grasses can be very dense.
Not at the beginning of the year. I mean,
I grass all throughout my property and they stay there. And then we also have trees, obviously, that are blocking out the view as well. In order to create greater coverage there, in addition to the retaining walls that are there to block out any of the light.
the oak trees will just be chunks, they won't really block.
Yeah, I mean, they just take like a feet from us.
Limber pines.
It's a native pine
Is
yes,
there another name for it?
yes. I can't tell you right off the bat because I'm old, but
It's okay.
no, it's a native and it's loosely branched, fast growing, tall, and it isn't a Christmas tree. It's a rougher kind of look to it, but I mean,
Or like a white
more
pine?
horizontal. No, it's a pine, but it's not a white pine.
All right,
No, it's just ordered.
I had a question about the beech,
Yes.
which you said was a European.
That's it. It's a European variety of beech. Beech is native to Connecticut.
Yeah, it
They
is,
don't.
if it's European, it's not native.
Okay,
Right,
yes.
yeah. I was wondering if it was less resistant or more resistant rather to the beech disease that's affecting a lot of beech trees in Connecticut.
I could tell you if I look it up, but I mean, we have the same question sometimes with hemlock, and there are treatments for it, but beech trees are unique in the fact that they will hold their leaves all winter. So when these leaves die, they're still on the tree, and you're getting a tremendous effect or the privacy that we're trying to achieve. We can't find a better tree than this that we've been able to locate.
No, I was just wondering whether they, because I know our beech trees are being heavily impacted by beech diseases. Whether because it's European, whether it had less or more resistance to us on those. That's what I was.
I will sort that out.
I just had one question. Obviously, there's gonna be dumpsters there. Where are they gonna be placed? I know at one point they were at the end where it looked like you were gonna put the snow. So obviously that's moved.
Yes, again, James, thank you.
Make sure you guys are speaking up.
You guys hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, sorry. All right, so what was, the dumpsters were in this location here
Right.
before. We spoke to the fire marshal and he wanted a stone access in case he had to get a vehicle through here out to the Farmington Trail. So the dumpsters are relocated to this location here. So now, a truck comes in this way, loads, and then it takes off.
So they're on the smooth side of the wetlands, not towards the wetland.
Yeah.
Correct, yep. Pitching towards,
I see two squares. Is that what you're gonna have? Is the two squares?
these are the
I'm
dumpsters.
sorry, the two dumpsters.
These are the two dumpsters on a concrete pad.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
And they're pitched towards the parking lot. So all of, everything, every impervious improvement we have is pitched towards the catchment system. So these are designed to pitch at 2% towards the parking lot, so not towards the wetland.
So is any leakage or anything?
Correct. That'll come towards.
It goes into the parking lot, then into the storm basin.
Yes, correct. It goes through the whole stormwater.
Stormwater thing and captured and all that.
Yep.
And if I could make a recommendation, because the concern I have is bears getting into the dumpster. Driving down. And I worry that if they're not bear resistant or bear proof, and not emptied expeditiously so that people aren't just leaving refuse around, that the wetland and the steep embankment will turn into a garbage heap. Garbage bags right down right there. So if that could be built into the plan of at least ensuring that they are bear proof and emptied expeditiously, that would ease some of my concerns.
Oh, sorry. Sure, I'm sure if that's a concern, that is something we could certainly do.
I have a further question on snow removal. How much snow have you figured can reasonably be stored on property? I mean, how many inches? I mean, obviously this winter, we have not had a lot of snow. There are winters where we have lots more. I know I've run into issues on my property, which is not that large, and I don't have a huge driveway about where to put snow. So what have you calculated for?
I haven't run the calculations, but we do have this very expansive area to store the snow. And this area here and this area here to store the snow. In similar projects, if I do the calculation, it usually ends up about 30 inches of snow after, say, a 12-inch storm event. So I haven't run the calculation for that yet, but these two areas are larger areas than normal sites.
And what about in the northeast corner where there will be some snow storage?
One of the way we always handle snow in addition to that is that if at any point the areas that are available for snow storage become too high, we have the snow exported off site. We do this in multiple locations. All of these snow removal companies provide the service. So at any point, we have a maintenance plan that says you ship the snow off site and there's never a problem. There's too much snow.
Was that plan included in, possible I missed it? I'd like to review it if possible.
It's not part of the standard plan that an engineer puts in. There's part of an operations manual that the developer does. And we always ensure that we have a plan that provides for off-site shipment of snow in case of an over event. There's not an exact that goes along with that. And just hire a snow company and have a shovel and let it forward as opposed to stack.
I did have a question about snow storage in the start, the corner. That's where the river birch trees are going to be, and just wondering how compatible the river birch trees would be having snow pushed up against them.
Pre-treated, so.
Pre-treated.
Pre-treated.
They're multi-stem trees. These are animals. I mean, you can't get a 12-foot high dump loader, on top of, but, they're not a brittle tree. And I think that's not gonna be a major shortage area, so. And I did look up the beaches, I was sitting here, they're equally as liable to get this leaf disease. It's done by a nematode, which is kind of a little tiny worm. So there's no difference between the European and the American beach for that.
That's too bad. And I was also wondering about the 48-inch mounting
Yes.
diameter oak tree. How will it be impacted by the development of the parking lot? I mean, the roots extend quite out the front line.
They do. We're doing a couple of things, and Seamus may be able to detail this a little better, but we're gonna fence off the area so they can't drive on the green root areas. They can't pile material like bricks or heavy dirt on in the drip zone either, so that you have the best chance of not compacting the soil in that root zone. They would sooner, I think, that folks would rather not have a parking lot, but we would rather have a road to it. And then I'll be sending them out, maybe feeding them with those pipe feeders or really mature trees, drilling holes and fertilizing in that direction sometimes works. And it's a trick. You want to save them because of their unique size and adapted shape.
I just wonder how long they'll last.
I had a question about the matting on the steep slope. What kind of matting will be used?
So biodegradable mat, from a erosion sediment control company, I can't think of it off the top of my head.
No plastic.
Correct.
So we know sculpins and probably brook trout are in Second Brook and certainly in the Farmington River and rely on cold water habitat. Do we know how the water treatment and retention system is going to affect the temperature and periodicity of outflow?
So, for the record, James, again, James Moran. So, the best way for thermal transfer is infiltration. So every practice we have has an infiltration element to it. So we're infiltrating as much as we can for the thermal properties of it.
Okay, do you have any sort of estimate about the change in temperature of this development versus the current state? Or something like that, you know, what sort of change in temperature can we expect in the outflow and or change again in the periodicity of flow? So it matters whether you have brief periods of warm flow versus increase in the median temperature for various cold water fish species.
Sure. So evaluation of the thermal temperature of the water as it gets to the wetland is not done. I would say that's atypical, but I would say the water quality event, which is the winter storm event, which is when the hot would come through. We would infiltrate the 1 inch storm event. That's pretty typical. So that warmer product, first one that hits the pavement, the pavement is the hottest at that point. That will be infiltrated. So infiltration is how you reduce the thermal properties of it. Beyond the 1 inch storm event, the 2 inch, the 2 year, the 5 year, if they're small discharges, that water the storm has been going on for several hours at that point. Thanks.
I had another question about the dry wells. You said it's going to be inspected every year. Will there be a report filed with anyone?
Correct. There's a maintenance in the maintenance section of the verbiage. It says that a logbook has to be, for all of the practices, a logbook has to be maintained by the property manager as of when it was inspected and the depth of the sediment at that inspection.
And that can be inspected by the town? Or
Sure. I hadn't written that it would be sent to the town. I just said that the property manager is responsible.
It just seems like otherwise we're just going back to work.
And refugees are really, very similar situation. The whole time we had recently, you can request, on your, court approval that, these logs will be forwarded to staff.
Additional question about the curves, particularly along the northern edge of the parking lot. And will those be, I think they were described as monolithic curves, so they'll be straight up curves and not sloped curve?
There'll be concrete curbs, we're proposing concrete curbs along that northern edge.
So how, from the asphalt parking area, how high will that curve be?
6-inch reveal.
Okay, so another concern I have is, as we know, it was someone's been there or not. Amphibians and other wetland dependent species don't spend their whole year in the wetland. They migrate to the uplands, the forests or riparian areas, herbaceous grasslands, depends on the species. Undoubtedly, those species are moving through the existing property. They may not be there during the time that a survey was occurred. But a concern of mine is that if things like spotted salamanders on their migrations to the wetland or from the wetland may get thrown off by light, but also not have a way to escape the parking area without a curve, the Cape Cod style curve, which are recommended. So is that still a curve of that design? Is that still possible on a site like this?
Absolutely, yeah.
And it will affect the structure?
Yeah, not at all, so it's good.
Particularly along, the edges where the catch basins are, not wanting those species to then go to the only place where they could flow out in the catch basin and get filled there.
Getting back to that, the lighting on the end wall where the stairs are, you said it's gonna be a fabric. Oh, fabric? Oh, it's gonna be, I'm still trying to figure out the lighting on the end wall where the stairways are.
Yeah, it's an interior light, so the lighting will not kind of go any more than the lighting in your like vestibule.
But that comes out. It still comes out. So I was wondering, is there any way that you could shield that? I mean, you're lighting the interior, but is there any reason, is there any way to design it so that it doesn't come out of the building? Other than the windows, I mean, you can always go blind, but that's a huge wall. And you're lighting the interior, it's still getting out. Even if it's not exterior lighting. Is there a way of shielding that like from?
If the lighting on the interior of the building will never come beyond anywhere on our property.
No, it will shine out. I mean, I think it's
So it's not possible to light shine that it's basically.
Is there any reason why it can't be designed to block that light even further?
I don't know how you would block it.
Well, like these lights here in this room are lighting the outside of the outside right now.
They're lighting the outside?
Yeah, this light, the lumens here, the light waves are going through that window and lighting the exterior of this building right now.
Not beyond the edge of the.
Well, you can, if I go to Fitzgerald's across the street, I'm gonna be able to see these lights, see these windows lit up.
You see that in any house.
Correct. But that's sort of the point. Is there a way to?
I guess you'll have to tell us how that relates to a wetland issue.
It relates to Conservation Commission, which we also are, even though we don't regulate it, we are, still have concern, and it does impact the creatures of the wetland.
With all respect, the edge of that building is more than 100 feet from the edge of the wetland. We have absolutely no reason to believe that that's going to have an impact on the wetland, which is your jurisdiction. If you want to make a recommendation as a conservation commission, you're certainly.
We have no regulatory authority. We recognize we have no regulatory authority as a conservation commission. But as a conservation commission, we can still make suggestions
And we will certainly consider them if we can.
And it was something that I know would also affect the wildlife in the area that we are all concerned about as a conservation. So anything we can do to reduce the amount of lighting that spills out from a site, we appreciate it.
As I indicated, if you want to make a suggestion, we're happy to consider it.
We will walk with that. All right, any other questions?
Yeah, I have one other, just to follow up on the drainage from that center outflow on the northern side of the embankment. just want to make sure I interpret that right. So the areas elsewhere along the northern border, those areas are not going to have experienced the natural runoff and discharge of water that they currently experience.
Not to the degree that they currently do. So it will, obviously, any drop of water that's beyond on the slope will continue down the slope. We're not capturing, I'm just kind of reversing that slope.
Right, so rainfall that would have fallen on the asphalt within the upland review area and naturally discharged down into the wetland will be altered and concentrated into that more centralized area, which is still about 20 feet above grade of the wetland. So concentrated outflow there.
To your point, everything right now, this paved driveway, this building, this deck, this garage, this shed, all of this area is impervious and it's currently sheet flowing. It's untreated across the property.
And so I had then a question for the wildlife expert then. Would species that live in the soil, you know, salamanders, insects, other things that are within the upland review area and in proximity to the wetland be affected by the soil changes being dried out along the northern edge within the upland review area? Would the soil conditions change enough to affect species that live in that area right now, if the water is being concentrated more to a central point away from that?
Talking about on the northern slope.
Yeah, within the upland review area, if the water is now being focused to that central point and natural discharge that would have occurred throughout the full border of that northern property, would small species of animals that live in the soil, salamanders, etc., be affected by now the rerouting of water elsewhere, and the area that had the suitable range of moisture is now beyond that?
Yeah, just to circle back to your, this kind of ties into your earlier comment about Cape Cod curving, which is always a good recommendation. In this case, again, that Cape Cod curving treats or helps species that weren't really focused by our work. Let's dive into that. In this case, we would typically want to put Cape Cod curving in when you're putting a development, which is an impediment to migratory activity, if it's sited between a terrestrial upland, say for vernal pool, for instance. You have a vernal pool, you have your upland terrestrial forest, and you're siting a development, a house, a building, whatever it is, in between, in that migratory pathway. That's when you want to put Cape Cod curving in. In this case, if you think about, first of all, what's on site, there is no forest habitat on site. Salamanders, vernal pool species, the frog species that we're talking about, and this is a cave blubber frog, they do not use residential properties. Again, you might have something that could use an edge habitat, but when you have landscaping islands and select trees around an outbuilding or garage or driveway, those are not terrestrial habitats that amphibians use during the non-breeding season. And so then you would look beyond the site. Well, could they be coming through the site? What's beyond the site? You have a roadway that is a complete impediment to activity. So that's, in that case, we generally wouldn't recommend Cape Cod curving, but it certainly, you know, it couldn't hurt. But in this case, it's not a state where we normally recommend that. To your second question, could you have some change in soil moisture regime on that north slope by changing now what you have runoff just across that whole band, basically with the driveway and the garage and concentrate in one spot? Sure, you could have some soil moisture change. You probably see that impact in the first 20 feet or so of that edge. The real issue there is if you were to take out any forests, I don't think there's much in the way of tree clearing because the slope quickly drops off. So it's really tree clearing that you want to focus on in terms of this second brokerage tied into your question about thermal impacts, which is a huge issue for fisheries. And those are the two things you want to look at. Fisheries impacts, we always recommend. The standard is maintain 100-foot tree buffer, or if you already don't have that, just don't increase tree clearing. The second thing is, as Seamus said, you don't want to convert what now infiltrates in the ground into surface discharge. So you want to get any stormwater back into the ground before it gets back to the groundwater discharge as opposed to surface water. And as Seamus said, the focus really is on the 2-year storm. Most of our storms in Connecticut are 2-year storms, which is like a 1-inch rainfall. That's why everything's designed to treat what Seamus mentioned as the water quality volume. That's where most pollutants are. Those are the small storms. You want to capture that 1 inch of rainfall, get it back into the ground so it discharges. To groundwater to the stream as opposed to down the slope. So that's what I think what James is saying. Mitigating impact. Thermal impacts.
So, like just follow up then, so you mentioned the tree removal would have a larger impact on the soil quality. What impact do you think, like the removal of those 4 trees within, just specifically within the upland review area would have on that soil?
You're not gonna see 4 trees, you know, if you open up the tree canopy, rows are gonna be drier because you're gonna get more sun. Typically what people do to compensate for that is they amend the soil, they plant ground cover, shrub cover, and put mulch down, and that protects the soil. Generally don't analyze impacts on a 4 tree basis, you're really looking at larger scale impacts.
I just want to make sure I understand something correctly. So I know we're saying infiltration is the preferred practice for reducing potential increase in temperature of the runoff water. But am I wrong that they're collecting the water into a catch basin, which is under a hot pavement and potentially not actually cooling while it's in that location? And then it's not infiltrating and being released as groundwater, but it's being released through an outflow, concentrated outflow. Am I misunderstanding that, or?
Yes.
Okay, well, could you clarify, please?
Sure, and then I'll let the engineer actually say,
Sure.
but, the infiltration standard that our engineers use is to, capture the water in these underground chambers, and the water will infiltrate into the groundwater from there. 1 inch rainfall, is fully captured within it, as Seamus testified to. 100-year storm is captured within there. It doesn't automatically flow out at a specific rate. It has to travel. I'll let Seamus talk about this, but it travels through that underground chamber system before it ever discharges. So it isn't like you're turning on a faucet and the water is running out. That's not how the system works. Seamus,
Yeah, that's not what I implied either.
So I think your question is the 1 year storm event, for example, when that 1 year storm event gets into catch basin and gets into the subsurface system, does it then discharge? Was that the question, or how does it discharge?
Sure, well, I'm wondering, yes, how does it discharge? Is it being transferred into the groundwater and that's how it seeps out? Or if not, then what purpose does this outflow we've been describing have?
So that's exactly it. So the lower storm events, that's the out control structure. The 1 inch storm event gets into the system and it infiltrates. So there's a low orifice, there's a low opening in the side of the orifice that allows the water in the basin to get to a certain elevation. So it can't get out past the outlet control structure to a certain water elevation. That water elevation, when you run the numbers, we'll design it to the water quality event, which is the 1 inch storm event. So if the basin, the bottom of the basin, say is 88, bottom of the structure is 88, if the water pools to 88.5, I'm going to put a low flow orifice at 88.51. So that way, if the storm is hot, a 2 year storm event, it'll fill up to 88.55, and some of that discharge, half an inch will flow through that low orifice and eventually go out to the outlet control structure, through to the outlet.
Thank you for clarifying.
Well,
I did want to make just one additional comment. Commissioner who questioned whether there would be an impact on soils in the upland review area, not in the wetland, specifically along that northerly boundary. I just want to remind the commission of section 10.5 of your regulations, which directs the scope of your review in that regard. And I just want to make sure that that's part of what you're cognizant of as you deliberate. Thank you.
And if I could just respond, section 10 F of that same town wetland regulations allows me to ask about concerns outside of the area that could affect wetland dependent species that spend time in that upland embankment, in that slope.
Just to clarify something also for the commission. There's a normal temperature gradient in soil. I don't know what it is, but I know it exists. You have the soil that is being exposed to sun and leaf litter and topsoil. So of course, at the surface, it's going to be warm, right? As you go down, there's a temperature gradient in the soil that if you probably Google it, you can probably see what it is. But I've experienced being in a test pit, like 6 feet down in the summertime, and checking the soil with my auger and my spade on the walls of this test pit, and it's cold. It's not warm. So there's a temperature gradient, and when you get that groundwater over that slope as it seeps down into the ground before it gets into the brook 100 feet away, I'm not saying the water's going to be hot, but it's certainly, I mean, not going to be cold, but it's certainly not going to be hot. But it is a concern. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. That's a more act as a temperature gradient. Just like water.
Thank you. I have a couple other questions about soils. Yeah. So in the soil reports, you talked about how the soil, the native soil there is susceptible to frost heaves. Correct? Frost heaving, yeah. The native soil in the soil report highly susceptible to frost heaving and drainage issues.
That's going to be in the geotech report.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's in the GEI. Oh, that's not his report.
Okay. So can someone comment on that? Sure. I just have a couple questions about that.
He's not here, but I can pretend for a minute.
Okay, I think a follow-up would probably come to you anyway. So the soil that exists on the site is susceptible to frost heaving, as it says in the report. How do you think the asphalt, which also in that report said that they expect cracking the pavement within 5 to 10 years, how will the drainage system be affected by frost heaves, cracks, things like that over the period? And what things will be in place to monitor or mitigate that problem, cracking, affecting the drainage that you plan?
First thing I'd say is for frost heaves, you want to be below. So there's a cross section for the pavement above the stormwater chambers. That's the underside of the asphalt. It's 18 inches from the top of the chamber to the underside of the asphalt, and then 4 inches of asphalt. So effectively 22 inches down from the pavement. So there's a bed of stone to alleviate any potential frost heaves above the stormwater management system.
Okay. Yeah, and in the event of, say, over the next 5 to 10 years or beyond that, cracking that takes place in the parking lot, the 95-car parking lot, how will that affect the plan for drainage that you have in place already?
And I think one thing that actually helps us on the site is we have pitch. So you usually get cracking when water sits too long and it contracts and expands, especially in the winter. We have a parking lot that has pitch to it, so we won't have any of that water sitting on it, expanding and contracting and causing breakup of the pavement. So I do think that the gradient helps. So it might say 5 to 10 years. I think that's probably just a standard statement that pavement may start to crack after that long. But I think our design and our pavement would likely last longer just because of how it's designed, not just because of the topography, I guess I should say.
So this is sort of an unrelated question. One of the areas that we're supposed to focus on is change in the suitability of the area for recreational or aesthetic enjoyment. What do you think is the change in the area for recreational or aesthetic enjoyment as a result of this project?
So my first response is that that's not a wetland. Socially. More appropriately referred to zoning commission who oversees the approval of the site plan. My second response is, right now, this is private property that provides no recreational benefits for anyone. And so whether it's developed as a single family house or 200 apartment units, the current benefits that are derived from this property are only for the property occupants, and that will not change. The benefit of this particular property, as we see it, is its association with the Heritage Trail and the opportunity for the residents who will live here to make use of that. But I don't see any implications that will involve this in the wetlands issue.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You mentioned that you didn't have any alternatives in mind for it that did not have a possible impact on the wetland. Was a scaled down version of this that didn't involve such a large impervious surface, parking lot, at least to be out further away from the wetland? Was that ever considered as an alternative?
No.
Can I ask why?
This is a project that is being propounded under Connecticut General Statute 6-30G. The requirement within that statute is 30% of the units be dedicated to affordable housing for a period of 40 years. That represents a very substantial commitment by the developer in terms of financial commitments. And I'm doing another project in another town, and much larger project. It's 250 units. With actually the same number of affordable units, the town only required 10%. The developer did an analysis for the period of 40 years of dedication, the difference in rental income between an affordable unit and a market unit works out to about $5 million. And it reduces the net value of the project by about $4 million. So what Connecticut General Statute 8-30G has really done is change the subsidy of affordable housing from the communities or the state to the developer. So when you say, why can't you reduce the number of units, it makes the project undevelopable. And so when a developer looks at a project like this, at the end of the day, it has to make financial sense. That's part of your consideration when you look at feasible and proven alternatives. It's an economic feasible. We presented you with a plan that has no impact on a well. We believe, and you know, so far I haven't heard any experts say otherwise. The fact of the matter is that for this development to be viable and to provide this community with affordable housing, it needs this scale. And so when I gave you a rather glib answer when you asked me if we considered anything less, the answer is no, because under Connecticut General Statutes 8-30G, this developer has to subsidize 24 affordable units. And the only way you can do that is to have enough units at market rate to help pay for that.
Then put them on a 10-acre drive.
But you said, for the record, getting back to it. So really what triggers an applicant to come up with feasible alternatives is there has to be a finding of an impact to the well. And there's clearly, without even like stretching your imagination, we're saying that there is no impact to the wetlands and water courses. Therefore, there's no trigger to come up with a feasible prudent alternative. And this is the best feasible prudent alternative that was developed originally. So that kind of makes maybe make a little more sense. To answer your question.
Madam Chair, I would suggest maybe at this point that you move on to the public. I mean,
Yes.
I would,
Yes.
but not to take your time.
No.
Keep your questions. You can during this whole while the public hearing is open, you can always go back to the applicant and ask questions. But probably a good idea.
That was So I would like to open it up to the public now. You've been very patient. We'll have to have you come up to the microphone.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of be respectful and, you know, come up to the podium and state your name and your address.
Hi, good evening, Chairman, Kevin Beal, 12 Hampton Circle. Longtime viewer, first time. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. I'll keep this short. Appreciate Attorney Alter and Engineer Brand's explanations here. I was a little bit disappointed in some of the reactions here to reasonable questions. Among the commission members here, we have expert scientists who serve on this commission and others who are heavily involved. And I don't think that the questions are trivial at all. A concern of mine, not necessarily for inland wetlands, but just as a general statement since I'm here. Living on Hampton Circle, this theoretically under the statute that Attorney Alter referenced could easily go in under that statute right in my neighborhood. And I think that that's a concern for all of our statute, not only allows for that, but encourages that. And as Attorney Alter mentioned, the only way that it can be accomplished is through that larger size housing. So here's how it's germane, Madam Chair. There's also some consideration on the alluvial plain in the area, the confluence of Seconds Brook and Farmington River. That area there actually has some significant archaeological interest for the state, and I believe you're in receipt of a letter from the state archaeologist at the University of Connecticut, Dr. Sarah Sportman, who provided you with some content in the letter. And I'd just like to reference part of that concern. The 12,500-year-old land that's there has a significant history that includes villages, cemeteries, fishing, and hunting sites and stone quarries, among other site types. And that this area is frequently associated with pre-contact Native American reported on both sides of the Farmington River in Utah, Simsbury, and elsewhere in southern New England. And it has a moderate to high potential for intact archaeological resources. And so I'd recommend for consideration for the town and for the developer here to conduct an archaeological survey in this area. Normally, something like this would be conducted for a project like this by the State Historic Preservation Office, but because of the circumstances of this development and the statute that's being constructed under, that isn't a mandatory review, but I think it's appropriate at this time. Thank you for your time.
It's under alluvial soils. But do we have such permission in town? Look at that.
And normally it's part of you know, it could be part of the site plan review process.
Good evening. My name is Colin Aaron. I live in 3 Fleetwood Drive. And I have 2 main points I'd like to raise tonight. The first is that I heard during Mr. Moran's presentation that there was going to be a fabric covering some of the drainage A site or the isolation chambers. Whatever term it was, the isolation chambers. And he mentioned some facts and figures about how much of the various sediments and contaminants are removed from that. One of the figures that I heard was 50% of oil removal. This is a 95 car parking lot. And so at 50% removal, that's about 48 cars worth of unrestricted oil contamination, seeping either directly into the groundwater at that site or going out through the drainage, both of which will direct down towards the river. So I have grave concerns about that. I'm not an expert in that space, so I don't know how much of that is accurate, but that's what I heard. The second is more of a general comment. I disagree with the assertion that there is no impact here. I believe we've heard some testimony that there may be no significant impact, but I've heard several times there is no impact, and I don't believe that that's accurate based on what I've heard. I think I also disagree with the assertion that there is no alternative here. I understand that there is a motive for profit here, and there has to be for a site like this to be built. And perhaps the best alternative is to build something like this on a different site that is not this close to the wetlands.
Nope.
My name is Ellen Gilbert and I live at 126 Hot Meadow Street. So I'm further down from where this is actually taking place. But I also think that, this project does impact all of us, especially on Hot Meadow Street. My question is, we have this large 95, parking lot, and pre-treatment in the winter is recommended. And we see in New England here how pre-treating the roads has a great impact on reducing the black ice on the roads. But we also see that the pre-treatment for parking lots, for the roads, we see a lot of pre-treatment even if the storm doesn't come. So you get a buildup of the calcium chloride on the parking lot. And then we get rainstorms in the winter time here. And so that's gonna go off into this drainage system. I'd like to know how well this drainage system is going to hold that calcium chloride so it does not go down into the runoff. Thank you. So I don't know who can answer that.
I would recommend, yeah, I would do the answers at the end.
My name is Joe Leeper. I'm a student at Simsbury High School and I live at 6 Washington Drive. I'd like to speak in opposition of the application for a permanent development at 446 Hot Meadow Street. I oppose it because the development would negatively impact the ecological and scenic value of the area, which consists of trees and foliage, and then obviously the valley of Hot Brook, which provides valuable habitat and a scenic view from the Farmington Canal Heritage Trail. The development would not directly impact the valley area, but all the runoff and all the different like light and sound pollution would negatively impact the wildlife in this area, such as the amphibians and the turtles and fish, birds, and insects, which would also impact the water quality of Second Brook and the Farmington River. In terms of scenic and recreational value, it would negatively impact the experience for cyclists and pedestrians on this area's bike path, which is now a tranquil riverside area, by replacing the trees and plants in the area. Also, I primarily oppose it because even though they said that there would be certain trees and areas of habitat that would be preserved, they're kind of in the middle of the parking lot, in the middle of the development. So I am skeptical of how much habitat and ecological benefit that actually provide. And there's all the light pollution and the cars and the sound pollution. And so the area that the habitat for the wetland species would be greatly reduced. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Deborah Robb. I live at 15 Nutmeg Court, which is directly north of this site. In fact, my backyard will be looking onto this building. So you stated, the applicant has stated that there will be no impact to the wetlands. Yet they also stated, Mr. Simsbury stated in particular, he could not review the impact of the wetlands directly to the north of the property because they did not have permission to access that property. To whom did they ask permission and who denied them permission to come onto our property and to do the full impact evaluation? Because none of us were notified that this would be occurring until a month ago. So we invite you to come in and do a full impact study, but that hasn't been done to date. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kelly Rothfuss. I have a loud voice, so go with it. I'm at 14 Nutmeg Court. I am Deb Faber. Same thing. Nobody has asked us permission to come and examine the wetlands. So that statement that they were not granted permission, they never asked for permission. And the statements also is how the wetlands miraculously stop at Second Brook. They continue northward, which I am about 15, 20 feet away, same with Deb. So we are in direct impact of this development. There's been a lot of discussion about these 100-year storms. Well, there's been 300-year storms since I've lived in that property for 17 years, to the point where my basement has flooded 3 times because of developments over in the Powder Forest region, cutting down all the trees, making all those large buildings. The amount of water runoff that has gone on to Second Brook, it has not been able to handle that level of water. Now, you're now doing another development that is going to, once again, increase the stress upon Second Brook to handle that kind of water runoff, which will then destroy my home and destroy the homes of my neighbors. It is not conjecture or hysteria. It's happened 3 times these 100-year storms that the water has risen to a point where it has entered into my home and done destruction 3 times. So it will increase. It is impacting me personally, not just the financial, but also the wetlands. The way the area is, that development is up on a hill. It is a slope. That light, they can tell you all they want, will shine down into that wetland. I know this because I'm on the other side. Wetland is on my side of the brook as well. That light will go in and it will disturb all of those species that enjoy the wetland on the north side of Second Brook. Thank you.
My name is Andrew Sylvain. I live at 6 Riverview Circle. You guys have HMI cable? I could plug in my laptop.
George. Oh, I'm taking notes. I'm sorry.
Can I, is there?
Come here. If the chairman will allow it.
Yeah.
It's not up to me.
Okay, so as you can see, the 2 previous speakers and my neighbors, this is their view from their homes right here. So one of the main concerns that I have is you have 94 parking spots. So you can have all that car exhaust plus delivery, DoorDash, UPS and Amazon. So a lot of that exhaust is going to come down into the wetlands area and not only affecting the actual animals, but my neighbors who just spoke up previously. And those storm drains that you guys have, the catch basins, and like I said, it sounds like they're gonna do a good job of collecting the water, but eventually it is gonna discharge. And the wetlands is about 20 feet below the property here, so eventually that water will come down. And as you can see, and going back to the light pollution here, so there's the existing blue house right there. There's the wetlands, so there will be light pollution, especially from the delivery vehicles, the cars coming and going. Also to the noises, when people leave and arrive at this development, they're gonna be hitting their little whoop whoop buttons and you're gonna be hearing the horns going off. So that will be noise pollution there as well, as long as quality of life, which might not be a wetlands issue, but it's all pertaining as well. So you can see here, this is a normal stream. So about 6-7 weeks ago, we had a pretty good rainstorm. I actually live right on the Farmington River, and it wasn't quite flooded, but it was just about on top of the bank. And as you can see here, keep going a little bit. This should be a stream, but it's starting to back up. You can see in the background of the photo there, that is the bike path, and there's a drainage tube that is overflowing. And now this is becoming a pond, which should be a stream. And then when you start adding those 94 parking spots and that water, which will seep through, eventually, like I said, that collection, like I said, tub will collect it, but eventually it is going to seep through because this property is about 20 feet higher than the stream here. So as you can see, this is just about 7 weeks ago. We had that rainstorm there, and it's already turned it into a mini pond and everything. And you can even see by the wet marks, it actually came down a little bit. So it was even a little bit higher by the time we took these photos. And just a couple of videos there, I won't waste your time there, but that's from the 2 previous neighbors who just spoke before me. This is in their backyards. This is the wetlands. This development will impact it. So I do suggest you vote this development down because it will affect the wetlands. Thank you very much for your time.
My name is Beatrice Prince, I'm at One Cafe. And I just had a couple of clarify a few things. One is this height that's coming to the, I guess, to the top of the north bank, and where exactly that height is, that is kind of sloped. And so I just wanted to know where that height comes out and if that's still on the property. And the other question is about the lighting that's on that north border. What is the home rated the diameter of that of the homes for the lights that's on right by the parking lot?
I think about 16 feet, I think.
That's what I thought I heard on the 16 people. I thought you said, I think.
Madam Chair.
No, okay, well, just that. Okay, so, I just wanted to know how much light comes off, because that's right on the border, of the pavement and the bank to the road. Another question was, that it, depending on how much lighting goes off, I think there was address about that reference fraud, about the lighting and the its habits. So I think that might be also. I think somebody mentioned something about inspection before a rainfall. So who's doing this inspection before a rainfall? But if I'm going to rain, then somebody has to go inspect. I don't. And what are they going to do with that? Also, how would that calcium chloride affect it leaking into the water? That would be the nature of the, how would it affect the wildlife, the fish and the salmon and all that? If that was in there as well. If they address the oil filters, and how can you ensure that it's going to be less than the 15 CSO? As the town reviewed any of their runoff plans? Because I think we're not supposed to have any increased runoff, but that parking lot does, that's a big, large, impervious spot, and normally nature would have it just absorb it to the ground and then go where it goes. But with that large of a parking area, I think that's a big concern.
Hi, my name is Catherine Rodrickson. I live in 7 Nutmeg Court, very close to the stream. And I want to just ask a question first. Have any or all of you been to the second brook? Probably not. I mean, because it's private property on the north side. But has anybody been to actually physically look at it? Yes. No.
Other than driving by now.
Pardon me?
I'm not gonna site visit.
Right, and I really, depending on the outcome tonight, I really recommend that you physically see it, because seeing a site map does not do it justice at all. So if there is any way that you could come and look, we invite you to do so. It really is a completely different experience from looking at that. So, I also want to make a comment at the beginning here that the only place that vessels have a completed building is in Trenton, New Jersey. So that means that they have never put one up in a place like this. So I hope we're not going to end up as an experiment in Simsbury for this kind of construction. So obviously I believe that the second group is worth protecting as an important wetland and as a tributary to the Farmington River. And I believe that if Vessel goes forward with this project, the brook will be permanently damaged. I just want to read a couple of short wetlands regulations involving significant impact activity. So that we can all understand these regs. Any activity which substantially diminishes the natural capacity of an inland wetland or watercourse to support desirable fisheries, wildlife, or other biological life, such as benefit communities, which I don't know what that is, and or to function effectively as a part of the total wetland habitat. 2, any activity which has caused or is likely to cause or has potential to cause pollution of a wetland or watercourse or aquifer. 3, any condition that may adversely affect the health, welfare, and safety of an individual or community. Now, the attorney said that that shouldn't be really considered since somehow it doesn't affect the wetland, but it's part of the regulation, so I guess we really should pay attention to that. And the last one refers to the uses and operations occurring in upland review areas around a wetland or watercourse that may have an adverse effect on a wetland or watercourse. Therefore, it is the policy of the Commission to strictly control the following activities, which shall be regulated as regulated activities if occurring or proposed within 100-foot uniform upland review area. All of these next items will be conducted, except for a few. There will be clearing, grading, paving, excavating, depositing of or removal of material, earth moving, filling, construction, clear cutting. I guess they're going to leave a couple of trees, but I can see on that because I've been to the property a lot or seen it from my vantage point. And there's a huge white pine that looks like it's going to be gone. And there's a huge hemlock as well. So I would say it's pretty close to clear cutting. They're going to take down a lot of trees that help absorb the water currently and also provide oxygen instead of exhaust. So the stormwater drainage discharge, I don't know, I guess that remains to be seen. So adjacent homeowners are concerned that the bank is going to get destabilized, that there's going to be a lot of construction. And furthermore, the terrain of that entire property is a slope. So I have to imagine they're going to have to level and push a lot of soil to create a level place to put their building. So, and the site map also says that they are removing the topsoil. So that's usually never a good thing. So I want to say a bit about Second Brook. It's not a static system.
A little bit more.
I'm sorry.
Just a little bit short more. Don't have enough time.
They got a lot more time than 5 minutes. Didn't they?
We're trying to get everyone else.
I know. And so, I'll just say about the flooding of the brook, it can't enter the Farmington River because when it gets to a certain height, it can't go in. So that's why you get the ponding. And so that makes for really wonderful wetland. And because the wetland is important for wildlife, any impediment to it reaching the stream should be considered. I mean, because not all the animals live in the water, they drink the water and they need that. There's exhaust, it's composed of carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, hydrocarbons, benzene, and formaldehyde. These toxins are airborne and not captured by storm drain. So I did ask about the chambers through engineering, and they leach down towards the groundwater, but when they use the 100-year flood to mitigate concerns about reaching full capacity, it's not even considered a reliable metric according to FEMA. So in the 45 years that nearby neighbors have observed Second Brook, flooding has occurred several times without ever being designated as a 100-year event. Some of the homes have flooded more than once. Currently, the land absorbs much of the rain. There's heat island. The parking lot's going to be very hot. The light pollution is going to be definitely a problem. And from the parking lot, and regardless of the style of lights, certainly the entire parking lot will be lit up all night and impossible to ignore by wildlife and nearby neighbors. The 40-foot staircase is going to be incredible amount of light trespass, and there's noise pollution. I'll wind up, I promise. I'm so sorry, but we did wait a really long time to speak. The town building inspector said that no detailed building specifications have been submitted, and this has to do with noise pollution, which will be definitely occur. The developer said that there would be solar panels on the roof without verifying their capacity to heat and cool 80 apartments. But the panels also provide energy for hot water and all the electricity required to run refrigerators, dishwashers, washing machines, small appliances, computers, televisions, audio equipment, etc. The building will need a significant power source. We have concerns that the power source will generate constant noise running 24/7, 365 days. We don't want to hear that, and nor do the wildlife. Aside from the building, replacing one original neighbor with 80 plus neighbors will add an exponential level of noise to the location. Finally, all the pollutants and toxins that I have mentioned, some of which I couldn't at a time, will negatively affect Second Brook and the wildlife that depends on it. The health of the nearby homeowners will also be adversely affected by exposure to the toxins and pollution generated by the large parking lot that runs along the top of the bank of Second Brook. Thank you for your patience.
Can you pull up your first or second slide for context? This is the pointer that works for me on one to show context. For the what I'm going to talk about in some of my neighbors. This is the pointer near the middle. I want the green button. Green button. Thank you. The next one up, where you you really helped me, the lawyer, of the picture that you showed development of where the wetlands is. You can see other homes. Keep going. Almost like your first or second one. Where are you? One right there. Perfect. This is their development right here that they want to build. Okay. My neighbors, we're talking. They live all right here. This is my house right here. 12 Matters Crossing. My name is Michael Hoppa. I live at 12 Matters. Actually, it's this one. That's Sarah, myself, Chris, and Nicole. We live on 12 Matters Crossing. This is Matters Crossing. This is all Hazel Meadow development. There's Hazel Meadow 1 and 2. Hazel Meadow 2, I've lived there over 20 plus years. First house I ever bought. Work at a large insurance company in Bloomfield. Friends that I work with told me, you can't go wrong living in Simsbury. And I said, oh, look, it's along the Farmington. I can sit on my back deck, see the Talcott Mountain Tower. I can see everything from the Farmington. I can walk down with my canoe, go and jump in the river, go up, south, north, wherever. Now, the view of my back deck will be looking at a 4-story building. They're telling me there's trees and it's possibly, but at night, sometimes I can see the Mitchell Auto Group. At 5 in the morning, I hear the dump truck guy come in and pick up all their dumpsters. I sit here on my deck sometimes, and I'll get a little bit more into just why I'm bringing this up. I sit there and see wildlife. I see the bald eagles going up and down the river. I see mama bear and her cubs come up. This is a thoroughfare for the mama cub, the deer. And right now I am renovating this house because it is on the market. We put it on the market in January. We had an open house 1st of February. We had 15 offers come in. When we had to disclose that this was coming through, all 14 backed out except one. Right now, we are working with that person. They're still interested in possibly buying our property until they find out what happens to this development. So that's all I have. Thank you.
I'm Elizabeth Peterson, 32 Foxton. I wanted to start out by asking about the trash, because that is shown on some of the diagrams. It seems like the equivalent of maybe 1 or 2 parking spaces, and with an 80-unit apartment, I'm concerned, I know it's been brought up before, if that's to scale, because if we all know living in Simsbury with the bears, and the fact that it's so close to all the waterways, that we could have pollution in the Second Brook and the Farmington River if there's just not enough capacity or pickup or constant pickup of the trash. And the other question I have is, we know that composting is coming, it's already being discussed in the state, maybe mandated, and how they're planning on having, composting. Earlier, another speaker referenced the, letter from the state archaeologist, Sarah Sportman. I just wanted to go over a couple of things. This is considered a sensitive area because of the confluence of the Second Brook and the Farmington River of the pre-colonial period indigenous archaeological resources. There have been several sites found within a mile of this area, and even the whole Farmington Valley, there are over 250 archaeological sites found in the river valley. And then just a little ways down in Avon, significant Paleo-Indian. I'm sorry, am I inconveniencing you? No. Okay, you're being really loud. Not okay. One of the most significant archaeological sites possibly ever found in New England, and possibly in the whole country, was found just a little ways down the river in Avon, where they have found such significant information. It's changed a lot of the scientists, archaeologists' view of the Paleo-Indian period. And that's really, really, really huge. They have found completely different information they ever knew. In fact, they have found that mastodons and humans probably coexisted, and that's the first thing that's ever been found. So I just wanted to underscore the importance of the fact that this is in the confluence of these wetlands, and ask the developers consider doing the right thing, because unfortunately, Simsbury has a pretty bad history of mistreating the local Indian tribes. A lot of them had property taken from them, and even documented in historical society.
Got nothing to do with it tonight. But I clear you with it. For the wetlands.
But because of the confluence of the wetlands, where the significant archaeological site is, okay, right? That's what I'm pointing out. And I'm just asking that they would take that into account and do the right thing and do an archaeological survey, because we have really strong evidence there's important archaeological information here. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Alan Weisberg. I'm through Lord Drive, West Simsbury. I want to give credit to the engineering here that's done, considering the challenges that they have. It's a little bit like putting a square peg into a round hole, unfortunately. And the notion that things can always be perfect, I think, is a misnomer as an aerospace engineer. We know about systems that are tested to the guild, and yet we have Challenger, we have Apollo 13. No matter how much we engineer it, things are going to go wrong. And in this case, there's too many things that are on the hairy edge, right down to the local the guy that's supposed to watch over all these systems. That's just a resident in the building. Things are going to go wrong. So from that standpoint, I think although it's a valiant effort to try to do this, but there are other factors included here, namely the fact that you're dealing with an R15 zone, single family residence zone are now being swapped over into a commercial thing that really is inappropriate. A lot of these problems would go away and stick to the single family home. And anyway, that's the zone. Anyway, that's my thoughts on that. Thank you.
Other comments from the public?
Yeah, I have a couple little things. I can just sit right here.
No, ma'am.
Can I just stand right here?
Nope.
No, okay. Oh. Yeah, I have to agree with him. There's like, I can talk loud enough.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, and I live at 3 Tamarack in Simsbury.
And
Oh, McDonald. Oh, sorry, yes. So I'm not directly impacted like the people in Nutmeg, but it does affect us all like property
property values and such like that, just like this. Mr. Palmer can't get rid of his house now because he had to disclose that. Okay, so anyways. My question was this little tank thing you got going here, and they're gonna test it a couple times a year, and the caretaker's gonna go out there and test it, right? And he's gonna stick his stick in, he's gonna, oh, yeah, that's good. So who's gonna come out and say, who's gonna stand beside him and say, yeah, that looks good, or that's too much sediment, or whatever? I mean, just taking one person's word, he's gonna stick a stick down and go, oh, that looks good now, we'll just go on another 6 months, right? So, I really like public speaking, sorry. Also, like Kathy said too, I wish somebody would have come to our neighborhood, come to our wetlands. They said they tested their own property. They didn't come down to the waterways and test. And then after the salts dumped down for a few years, and we can't really get rid of the chloride, I don't think, because I know that in Simsbury we have a pretty high rate of chloride in our own drinking water. It's like the natural limit we're all drinking. So really you can't extract it, and we're getting our water from wells. So if it's not, you can't really take the chloride out. You can't extract it. So eventually, that will filter out into the wetlands, all that chloride they're putting in the parking lot. I realize, yeah, some of our, on the streets of Hot Meadow and nearby, all that does get filtered down and it does go down in some of the streams, but let's be good stewards and not dump some more down there now. And I know it was brought to my attention that our property in itself was probably built on partial wetlands. Yeah, it probably was. And we had different rules then, and we weren't good stewards. But now we're getting to the point where we know what's killing our planet, right? So we want to take good care of it. We don't want to add any more that's going to harm in the years to come. When you start dumping that chloride down there and trash and everything, it's going to break down in when you change one thing in that environment, it changes it all. It's like a domino effect. Right, and also nobody mentioned the dumpsters, but they did mention them a little bit. I work at the post office. When they dump the dumpster on Thursday night, it doesn't all stay in the dumpster. A lot ends up in the parking lot. It can't take it all. You're dumping on a windy night, and that empty water bottle, the empty Dunkin' Donuts cup that the guy doesn't bother to carry into his house and put his own trash can, to put it in a plastic bag, and put it in the other stuff. He's just gonna walk over from his car, put it in the dumpster, right? And when the wind's blowing that night and everybody's got their 20 Dunkin' Donut cups in there, and the wind takes it all, it's gonna end up in the parking lot and blow over or kind of go through that area where I don't see a retaining wall going 100% across. It will blow over. Also, when the bear's done, he doesn't stay in the dumpster and have a meal and leave his scraps in there. He gets in there, because I've seen him at Simsbury Square, in the dumpster with his head poking out. He gets a bag, he brings it out, he drags it across the bike path, and he sits over in the wetlands and eats his meal, and then he leaves his trash. He doesn't politely wrap it all back up and put his scraps back in the dumpster. And that's what's gonna happen. And he's gonna go to the closest wildlife area, and that's gonna be our wetlands. So who's gonna come every day after that bear comes in there? Because, oh yeah, you got a gate, it latches. That bear knows how to get in there. He knows how to get in people's back doors, right? And I'm just gonna say, when the wind blows too, when there's trash in the parking lot, wetlands. It's the closest area. So everybody else said a lot of things I already said in my other point.
Any other comments? Let's see, it's 10:15 or what? Oh, God, sorry. I'm thinking we should continue this next time or have the applicant ask.
So I would suggest two things. One, I would give the applicant an opportunity to respond to the questions from this evening. And then once he's done, you can consider a motion to continue the hearing to a future date.
Does the applicant want to do the answers tonight to the questions that are posed? Or do we want to do it next?
Can you speak up? I can't hear you.
What's your choice?
Which project the city
I think it might be easier for us and for you if we take these questions, we'll answer the ones that are actual questions rather than comments. We'll get you those before your next meeting. They'll be on the website so that people can see the answers. Rather than go through these now, that makes more sense to me. We can add information that might be relevant to your deliberations at the same time.
I think we're all delighted with that. I think we're all delighted with that.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I manage to do that. And then, the only thing I would ask or make a motion on the hearing is that if any of you have specific information that you feel is absolutely critical, tell us now, or if you can't think of it right this minute, let Mr. McGregor know what it might be. He can communicate with us so that when we come back the next time, you're not asking us a question that we could have answered if we had time to do the research. That I think is the most productive way to do this. And so, you know, you could do it through your planner and it'll become part of the public record, even if it goes that way when we come back to the next meeting.
This is always questions, one thing that comes. Pulling in one's driveway.
Mr. McGregor, the only question I have for you is the individual showed a bunch of photos. Did you save those? So they're part of the record?
No.
Then you could ask the gentleman to submit those.
Was it,
I've already written you,
I can email these. I'm not connected with Wi-Fi here, so.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, just not to belabor anything, but I did want to note for the record that staff received a number of letters from citizens. We'll make those part of the record. They have been sent to both you and the applicant and posted on the website.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question? Okay.
Sure.
A couple of our residents that asked and sent an invitation to come visit and look at the wetlands. Have you guys thought about it, or will you do that, or?
We'll discuss that.
I just didn't know for this matter, I'll go ahead and make the motion that we continue the public hearing for application CC 22-29 446 Hot Meadow Street, with Westwood Technologies to the regular interwithin agency meeting scheduled for 21st, 2023 at 7:30 p.m. A Simsbury High School Auditorium, 34 Farmers Village Road, Simsbury, Connecticut.
The meeting on the 21st at 7:30 is going to be at the high school auditorium.
Monday the 20th, and that's here.
Yes.
All right.
No one's here on Monday the 20th. You guys are Tuesday the 21st at the high school.
Yes.
How would they have that? It's a meeting night.
All right. So we have a motion and a second that we have all in favor.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm still in the meeting.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I recommend the reporting on the agent approvals at your next meeting. I would get a motion to adjourn.
They have some permission to watch you.
I would recess for 5 minutes until everybody clears.
I'm sorry, I gotta be on the phone. I just wanted to submit, because I was just gonna read out, but I'm not going to. I didn't arrive at something, and I put my name on that second sheet.
Yep, got it.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. Zoning commission, public hearing. The division from the board zoning. The images can all go right. Yeah. Zoning not until.
I got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Folks, at the risk of kind of annoying you, we do have other meeting items. So you can kind of see. Continue with your.
Okay. Well, good to see you. Okay, get back to the, it's been a recommendation. No more.
Yeah, I mean, a site visit to the subject property or an off-site visit, which is different.
Simsbury County.
So that's going to require a meeting announcement as a special meeting and coordination among your group as to the time and contact for me with the condo association, which is multiple owner regime that I'll have to reach out to. So I have the note of the, of the offer, but yes,
They have a homeowners association.
I believe so. Staff will have to figure that out.
Yeah, I second that. I would be. I would take my money on.
This would have to be before the.
Yes. So I wouldn't even look at any dates until I contact and then we'll try to figure it out. We'll do a doodle poll or whatever we'll need to do.
Thank you.
Sorry, Jeff. Sorry.
So, motion to table discussion of the agent actions until our next meeting.
Second? Yeah.
Do we need to table
You don't even need to take action on it. Since you didn't take action, I'll have them on the next agenda.
Second.
All in favor?